Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. You are most welcome here. I have absolutely no Valentine's decor, and I thought it would be really fun to make some. I like the rustic or primitive style, and I really love Scandinavian gnomes, so I thought I'd make something that is rustic or primitive and includes some gnome decor. I'm really looking forward to making this. Let's go have some fun.
I wanted to make my gnomes out of wood, and I wanted to find an easy source of wood. And I was in a store and I saw these large Jenga-like blocks. These are called Large Jumbling Tower, and they're at Big Lots. They say $20 on them, but they were $22 at my Big Lots. And they're about 1 by 2 by 5 3/4 inches. I wanted to have at least one gnome, though, that was a different size, a little bit larger. And I have this wonderful piece of a palette. I never know what to do with these pieces. These are the pieces that are between the boards on some palettes. Other palettes have blocks between the boards. But I have this wonderful piece, and I think it really is a cool piece of wood. What I'm going to do is use the radial arm saw to cut out one of those narrow pieces, and I think that will be a good gnome size. So I just cut that and cleaned it up and sanded it. And now my process for making the gnomes is basically the same for all 3 gnomes, except that I used different colors and different materials for the hats. So what I have here is just an old sock, and I'm using that as a stand-in for the hat so I can figure out where to put the nose and the beard. The nose is a little wooden bead, and I happen to already have these wooden beads, but you can buy wooden beads just about anywhere, including the Dollar Tree. So I put the hats almost about halfway down on the gnome. And then what I'm going to use for 2 of the beards is this wonderful sherpa fleece, which I've used before. I used it for my wreath, and I used it for my llamas. And I have a lot of scraps left over. So I'm going to cut a beard and just sort of trim that into a beard shape. And I'm also going to cut a little mustache. And I'm going to glue all of this onto the gnome. For the nose, I'm going to use some wood glue, and I have Gorilla wood glue here. And then, just for a little assist, I'm just going to put a little bit of hot glue to hold that in place while that dries. And then I'm going to use hot glue to attach the beard, and then I'm also going to use hot glue to shape the mustache, and then attach the mustache to the beard. Now I'm also going to give the gnome little bead feet. And I'm going to glue those with wood glue, and then again use a little bit of hot glue to hold them in place while they dry. Because my table isn't particularly level, I've put the gnome on one of the other blocks of wood to position the feet and get them glued in place. Now for the arms, I'm going to use this nautical rope jute from the Dollar Tree, and also some jute twine, which is in the crafting section at the Dollar Tree. And I'm going to do a technique called whipping, and I do have a 2-minute technique on whipping on this channel, and I will link it here and also in the description. But you'll probably be able to see how I do it here as well. I took a piece of the rope and I measured it so that it would go around the back of the block of wood, around to the front, so that the 2 hands, which are going to be beads, would be in the front. I cut it and I used a narrow piece of masking tape to tape off each end. That will make this process easier. And this is a little bit of a variation from what I've done in the past, because what I want to do is whip a bead onto the end to be a little hand. So I'm going to pass some of the jute twine through the bead and cut it off so that I have a little bit of tail on either side, about at least 1 inch. And then I'm going to glue that bead with just a little bit of hot glue to the end of the rope just to make this easier. Now I'm going to hold those 2 ends of twine that are through the bead against the rope. And then I'm going to do the whipping. Now with the whipping, I cut a longer piece of the twine, again folded into a loop, but I put the bend in the loop opposite the bead against the rope over those 2 ends of the bead's twine, and then from the end near the bead I start wrapping, and I wrap down to the loop then pass the twine through the loop, pull the other end so that it pulls the loop under the wrapping that I did. Then I pull both ends tight and then trim everything off. I'm going to do that with both ends of the rope, so we have 2 hands, and I'm going to do 3 pieces of rope, 1 for each of my gnomes. Now the variations in the gnomes are the color of the beards, the color of the beads, and then also the hats and the little embellishments that I give them. So for one little gnome, I decided that I wanted to knit a little hat for him, and I'm just doing basically a rectangular piece of fabric that I'm then going to stitch together to make a tube. So this isn't any sort of fancy knitting. It's really pretty straightforward, and I'll tell you what I do here so that if you want to try knitting this hat, you can knit it as well. This is, I would say, pretty much a beginner knitting project. But if you don't like to knit, you could easily use a sock for this, just like I used a sock to figure out where I wanted the hats to be. I think if you have a cute sock which has a nice texture to it, that would be a good stand-in for this hat. So for this hat, I'm using a 4mm needle, and I'm using some yarn from the Dollar Tree. This color is taupe. I cast on 24 stitches using a knit cast on, and then I did 5 rows of alternating knit and purl. That is a very narrow ribbing. On each end, I always do a knit. This gives me a garter border around the hat. But then I did in between the 5 rows of knit 1, purl 1. After I did that, I continued with the garter border, but I alternated knit 2, purl 2 to make a wider ribbing. And this is a relatively easy knit. It's something you can do while you're sitting on the couch watching TV or watching your children play hockey or soccer or something like that. Just sit and do your knit. It didn't take very long. This hat is for one of the smaller gnomes, and I stopped when I had 7 inches of my knit. This seemed like a good length. Then what I did was I thread the yarn onto a yarn needle, and then I threaded it through the top row of stitches. So instead of binding off, I threaded yarn through the top row of stitches and cut that yarn off. So I had a piece of yarn just through that top row of stitches. I'm going to use that to gather the stitches, so it'll just pull the little hat together at the top. And then I sewed the hat together. So I just folded it flat, sewed it together, and then pulled the top tight and tied that, and then turned it inside out. I thought that I would like a pom-pom at the top of the hat, and I thought it would be cute if it were a mixture of taupe and white yarn. So I wrapped those around 3 of my fingers about 30 times, and then I took a length of the taupe and cinched it in the middle, and then trimmed the ends, and then trimmed my pom-pom down. Leave those pieces that you use to cinch it in the middle long, and I put those through the top of my hat and then just tied them on the inside of the hat. And then to give that hat the ability to bend, I took a chenille stem or pipe cleaner and a little bit of fiber fill and put that inside the hat. The chenille stem allows the hat to bend a little bit. Now the last thing to assemble the gnome is to add the arms. And I had considered drilling a hole through the block, but I thought, you don't want to drill a hole, and I don't really want to drill a hole. I think that hot glue will be just fine. So I positioned it where I wanted it, and then just used some hot glue to glue it down in the back. Now I want the little hands to come around in the front so that he can hold a heart. So I'm also going to glue those little arms down on the side, and I just used hot glue for that. If you wanted your gnomes to be holding hands or holding something off to the side, you might not want to glue it down on the sides. Now for my other gnomes, for the tall one, I also used up off-white sherpa fleece for his beard and for his mustache. For the other gnome, I happen to have some tan-colored fleecy fabric, which I used for his beard and mustache. And for both of those gnomes, I let their beards flow down onto the ground, and I thought that that could look cute. I'm not sure if it really does. I can always trim them shorter. But for their hats, I have this nice piece of gray fabric. It's one of those 18 by 21 inch pieces of fabric that is sold in the craft section at Dollar Tree. And I like the texture of this, and it's a very soft piece of fabric. And then I also have from the automotive section this super soft microfiber cloth. So I thought that these might make nice hats for the other 2 gnomes. So I'm going to use the dark hat on the gnome with the light beard and the white hat on the gnome with the dark beard. And so for the dark bearded gnome, that's a smaller gnome, I cut a 7 by 7 inch square out of that fabric. Now it has a more furry side and a less furry side. I decided to put the more furry side on the inside, but fold it up so that that would be sort of the brim of his hat. And then I just put it around the block to figure out where I wanted to sew a seam in it. And I did just hand sew that seam. You could certainly run that up on a sewing machine. And then around the top, I just sewed a running stitch so that I could pull that tight so I could cinch it. And then I snipped the top of that, the fabric that was over where I had sewn that running stitch to make sort of a little pom-pom out of the top. And then I just sewed that brim up a little bit, and that was his hat. For the other gnome, I was using the fabric, and I cut an 8.5 inch strip out of that fabric and pinned it together around the gnome, and then used some of the jute twine to tie that to the gnome, and then I could take the pins out. I didn't need the pins. Now I didn't bother to cut that short. I just sort of folded it up inside itself until it was the size that I wanted, and I made a tassel out of the jute and just tied the tassel around the end of the hat. Now I want my gnomes to have little hearts to hold. The Dollar Tree has these little wooden hearts which are called ornaments, and they come in a rounder heart shape and also a taller, thinner heart shape. So I thought I would paint some of these with a galvanized metal effect. And the first step of that is to paint them gray. I'm using Apple Barrel Pewter Gray. It's an acrylic paint, but you can use any gray. In the past I've mixed gray from black and white. Once the gray paint has dried, you're going to use some silvery paint and some black paint. Now the silvery paint is handmade modern acrylic paint in metallic pewter, and then just an apple barrel black. Use a little piece of just an ordinary kitchen sponge and sponge the silver on, sponge the black over that, and then sponge the silver back over that. I sponged silver over it twice again after I did the black, and that should give you an effect that looks like galvanized metal. And then I just figured out how I wanted to distribute some of those hearts among my gnomes. I glued a galvanized one to a raw wood one for the larger gnome, and I stuck a little raw wood heart in his hat band, and then I gave the other gnomes raw wood and a galvanized heart. Now I wanted to make some decor that was a sort of primitive decor to go with the gnomes, and I have these pieces of pallet wood. So I chose 2 of them, I evened them off, and I sanded them so that I wouldn't get splinters, but I didn't sand them a lot because I wanted to be able to do a paint technique where some of that texture of the wood would show through. I just laid them together and joined them with craft sticks. These are the larger craft sticks from the Dollar Tree. I used mostly wood glue, but just a little bit of hot glue, again, to hold it in place while it dries, and that worked really well. I have these 2 wonderful colors of white chalk paint. One is my favorite sheepskin, and the other is a brighter white. It is called Adirondack, and I did decide to use the Adirondack paint because I wanted less of a yellowy paint, even though I love that sheepskin. So what I did was I painted it on, and I started out very, very lightly, leaving a lot of that wood showing through because you can always add paint. And then I filled in by adding a little bit of water to the paint so that you could still see some of the wood through, but it wasn't quite so stark. Now I measured a 1/2 inch all the way around. I wanted to put some kind of trim around this that looked a little bit like metal. And I considered tin foil and I considered tin cans, but for various reasons I thought they would be difficult to apply. What I ended up applying is this HVAC tape, and it's basically aluminum foil that has tape on the other side. It's about $5 at a home improvement store. And I just cut pieces of the tape, and then using the lines, I applied it so that it would be even all the way around, and then just taped it around the back. And then to dull it down a little bit, I sponge painted some black acrylic paint onto it. Now, in addition to the leftover hearts that I have that I painted with the galvanized effect, those are those smaller hearts, I have these color your own ornaments from the Dollar Tree. So I filled in the holes with some spackle, and now what I'm going to do is stain them with a mixture of burnt umber, Tuscan Red, and black acrylic paint with a lot of water. This is mostly burnt umber, just a drop of the Tuscan Red and a drop of black. And then I'm just going to wash that over the pieces of wood. I'm also doing a few more little pieces here, and I washed that over twice to get a nice color. And then I sealed them with matte Mod Podge. Arranged them on my plaque in a way that I thought was pleasing. And hot glued them in place. Now I do want to say that Dollar Tree has some very nice plaques, so if you don't like working with wood, or you don't have palette wood that you can work with, you could always use one of these really lovely Dollar Tree plaques, paint your hearts, and glue them to that. And here's the plaque with the gnomes.
So what did you think of our primitive Valentine's decor? Did you have a favorite piece or a favorite gnome? Please tell me in the comments, or tell me if you would have done it differently. Maybe you would have used more traditional Valentine's colors. I would love to hear about it. I love hearing your thoughts. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take care.